Hello, Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to Quick Fix Medicodes. This is a continuation lecture for Principles of Tooth Preparation. In part 1 we discuss the preservation of tooth structure, retention and resistance, and in part 2 we discuss the structural durability, occlusal reduction and functional cusp bevel. Now in case you missed that video, so you can find the link in the description. Now in this video we are going to talk about marginal integrity. By marginal integrity we mean that where do we have to finish the restoration, that is where is going to be the ending point of the margin. Now the apical limit to your preparation is next to the gingival line till free gingival margin, and this is known as the marginal integrity. Now the restoration margin should be closely adapted to the cavo-surface finish lines of preparation to survive in the oral environment. Now the cavo-surface angle is the angle of tooth structure formed by the junction of a prepared wall and external surface of the tooth. Now the picture of the finish lines of preparation I'll show you later in this video. Now we will talk about the factors of the marginal integrity. Now it depends on two factors, the marginal location and the geometry. Now by marginal location we mean is that margin is placed in the reference to the gingiva. Now there are three types of margins. The first one is supragingival, which means above the gingiva. The second one is juxta or equal, which means middle of the gingiva, and one is the subgingival, which is below the gingiva. Now how to determine that which margin to give? So for posterior crown we give supragingival or juxta if there is pain, and for anterior crown we always go for subgingival margin because the anterior area is aesthetic area and we don't want our margin to be visible, so we give it subgingival, that is below the gingiva. Now for posterior crown we give supragingival margin. Now let's talk about the advantages, that it preserves the tooth structure. And do you remember the first component of tooth preparation, and we talked about tooth preservation is very important. If you have missed that, so go watch the part 1 video again so that you get this point. And number 2, gingiva is not compromised. Number 3, there is easy maintenance, easily cleaned by brushing. Now the fourth point is easy impression, easy to capture margin for the technician, and it is biocompatible with the surrounding tissues, that it is not harmful to the surrounding tissues. There is only one disadvantage, that is it has poor aesthetic, and that's the reason why we are giving it in the posterior teeth. Now talking about the advantage of subgingival margin, it is that it has good aesthetics. Just now I told you it has good aesthetic, that why we are giving it in the anterior region. So both the advantage and disadvantage for subgingival margin is vice versa to supragingival margin. Now the disadvantage is maintenance is poor and impression is uneasy. Margin identification becomes difficult for the technician. We'll talk about the finish line configuration. The first one is chamfer. Chamfer is the preferred gingival finish line for veneer metal restoration. It exhibits the least stress, so the cement underlying it will have less likelihood of failure. This is how a chamfer margin look like. You can appreciate a knife edge sharp margin at the cervical part of the tooth. Now talking about deep chamfer or heavy chamfer, it is used to provide a 90-degree cavo surface angle with a large radius rounded internal line angle. It is created with a rounded and tapered diamond burr, and this is the pictorial representation of heavy chamfer. The disadvantages of heavy chamfer is in the hands of an unskilled operator can create an undesirable fragile lip of enamel at the cavo surface. This fragile enamel can very easily fracture after cementation of the restoration. The deep chamfer provides better support for a ceramic ground than does the conventional chamfer, but it is not as good as a shoulder. A bevel can always be added to the deep chamfer for use with a metal restoration. Speaking of indication, it is indicated in the PFM crowns. Now the shoulder margin, it is a type of tooth preparation in which the finish line forms a 90-degree angle with the unprepared tooth surface. Like in this picture, you can see the margin, chamfer, shoulder and knife edge from distal and occlusal plane. Can you appreciate a 90-degree angle at the peak indicating shoulder and the inclination of the chamfer margin? Also see the knife edge. You cannot see much difference in knife edge because it's the most minimal preparation. Now in this picture you can appreciate the burrs that are being used for the preparation. For chamfer it is round end, and for shoulder it's a flat and tapered fissure burr. Here again you can see a picture of flat and tapered fissure burr used for the shoulder margin, and the indication is buccal surface of PFM crown and all ceramic preparations. The advantage of shoulder margin is that the wide ledge provides resistance to occlusal forces and minimizes stresses, that is it does not lead to fracture of porcelain that we have just discussed in the disadvantage of heavy chamfer, and it also keeps the area clean as it is biocompatible. The disadvantage is that creating a ledge, it does require the destruction of more tooth structure than any other finish line, that it's not preserving the tooth structure, and the sharp 90-degree internal line angle associated with classic variety of finish line conducts stresses in tooth. Another variant of shoulder margin is the radial shoulder, which is a modified form of shoulder finish line. The initial instrumentation is of ledge and is accomplished by a flat and tapered diamond finishing burr completed with a benign angle chisel. Now the advantages include that stress concentration is less than the classic shoulder and support for ceramic restoration is good. Indications include facial margin of metal, ceramic and all ceramic round. Now shoulder with a bevel. Watch part 2 if you want to know more about bevel, because I have discussed bevel in detail in part 2. You can find the link in the description below, so make sure you watch it. Now it is a finish line that is used in a variety of situations. Uses include gingival finish line in proximal box of inlays and onlays, occlusal shoulder of onlays and mandibular 3/4 crown. Finish line of choice for short walls can also be used in situation where a shoulder is already present, which is either destroyed by caries or any previous restoration. It is routinely not used in veneer crown because it causes more destruction of the tooth. And the indications include facial margin of posterior metal ceramic crowns. Now we will talk about the knife edge margin, which is a weak crown margin and it is rarely used. It has poor aesthetics and it requires over contouring of the tooth. Indications include the lingual surface of mandibular posterior teeth, and here you can appreciate a picture. You can see the on the lingual surface of the mandibular posterior teeth a knife edge margin is shown. Now, by giving the summary of all the types of finish lines, we have feather edge and knife edge, which are rarely used, and these are known as the minimal preparation finish lines. Next is chamfer. You can appreciate a rounded internal line angle facing towards the unprepared tooth surface. And then I want you to focus on the shoulder margin. You can see very clearly in this picture a 90-degree margin towards the unprepared tooth surface. Next is bevel shoulder, which is a modified form of shoulder margin. Now the bevel is created with a 30-degree angle, 90-degree for shoulder and then 30-degree for bevel. Next we will talk about the last principles of tooth preparation, which is preservation of the periodontium. This can only be achieved if the margin is made such that the patient can maintain the hygiene. So it should easily be cleaned by the patient. It should easily be duplicated by the impression without tearing or deforming. And the finish line should always be placed in enamel whenever possible so that it causes minimal damage to the tooth and the pulp. So that's it for today, guys. I hope you liked the video. If you did, please hit the like button and do subscribe to my channel as I keep coming up with such videos. You can comment down below if you have any confusion and what topic you want to see next. Thank you for watching.